they conclude that human factors are more important than any natural activity.
Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you guys.
Okay. There have been documented observations that species in biomes are shifting in their composition and in their geographic distribution in response to temperature change. This tends to dispute your claim that surface temperatures are not going up. Can you respond to these observations?
There are some reports that some biomes and some species are changing their distribution, the geographic distribution, as a result of warming. So, do you dispute that?
No. No.
So
don't dispute that.
If you said it's not warming?
In other words, we don't dispute any observations. The observations are well done and not biased. We don't dispute them. There has been no substantial warming, however, in the last century. It's about 0.5 degree centigrade. And as you see, the climate is now cooling. So these warming cooling effects are really quite small compared to natural year-to-year fluctuations. You know, in some years are warmer than...
United Nations pays for the meetings and funding and so forth. Who funds the report publication of an IPCC?
Well, I can answer that question about funding. We, as scientists, are self-funded. Okay? We do not draw salaries, we don't get fees. Our travel expenses are paid by grants, private grants, completely private. The publication, we made a deal with a publisher where instead of charging getting a royalty, which we're entitled to, we get free copies. That's the deal. So even the publication doesn't cost us anything. It shouldn't. After all, these are for sale. Publisher is making money on this. Not much, but some money. But we get copies, free copies. Now the book that's coming out next month is quite thick and very expensive. We will get a limited number of free copies. Again, we're not going to charge the publisher a royalty. It's not worthwhile because there are not going to be many copies of the book sold. It's too expensive. I can tell you something about the funding of the IPCC. The scientists who participate, again, are not paid for their work. However, they get their regular salaries from government grants. So they're basically paid by governments, by taxpayers. And then they go to meetings, and they have meetings many times during the year at nice places and nice hotels, and all the travel expenses are paid by the UN. And that comes, their budget is of the order of $25 million. It's quite large. Our total cost, all travel expenses and so on, has been of the order of $50,000. Big difference.
So, are there any other students that want to field the question? Okay, go ahead.
How do you know I'm not a student?
Just assume.
No,
Are you?
No. Just a follow-up. So if you get money from private foundations in the form of grants,
yeah,
who are the foundations?
Our money comes from private donations from private individuals. In this case, we also got a grant, one grant, from a private foundation. We applied for a proposal, and they sent us, in this case, $50,000.
Who are they?
I could give you the name, but they prefer not to be known because they don't want others to apply for grants. If you come to me afterwards, I'll tell you the name.
Okay, this goes to the core question about your motivation, right?
Our motivation?
Yes.
Our motivation simply was to do right. we're really interested in getting at the facts. We really believe that the IPCC doesn't have any evidence to back up their, and it really annoys us, annoys me particularly, to see them publish results or conclusions that are not backed up by real data. It's bad science.
You seem to pick and choose the time intervals for the interpolations of your curves.
What?
You seem to pick and choose the time frames in your interpolation of the temperature data. So you would say, the last 10 years, the temperature's been going down, or whatever.
Yes.
But if you take the long view, which you cannot do with the satellites, because you only have 30 years, don't you think that's a bit of a
Yeah, you're right.
subjective way of
As
thinking
I
of it?
say, you can get any trend you wish depending on the time interval. If you start during the peak of the Ice Age, 18,000 years ago, it has warmed, clearly. It's warmed quite a lot in the last 18,000 years.
Go ahead.
Could you pass the microphone, please? Thank you. Did I pass the test?
Yep.
The intelligence test, good. I don't think we want to spend too much time talking about the funding. I will say this. I have recent experience working both for a major oil company and then working twice for UN organizations. The contents of my report for the oil company have never been challenged in any way. I've never been asked to alter my findings one iota. In contrast, in two experiences with the UN, I am routinely told to adhere to a preset agenda. Thank you.
Somebody else? You have a thing? Just press the gray button. Yeah.
You flunked it.
In the IPCC slide that you had up before this one just a minute ago, a summary table of forcings both directions, it shows the positive 2.5 forcing from greenhouse gases, I believe, and then there's negative human forcings also, which I believe are about half of the, about the blue ones, the human blue ones are about half of the positive human ones. Which would suggest to me that if we just redouble our negative efforts, we can cancel out whatever positive effect there is. The negative efforts are things like contrails, jet contrails, which have albedo, and land use, such as roofing color, things like that, that would increase the albedo. So do you think that there are, assuming there is a positive effect, do you see negative offsets that we could do inexpensively to it would be less expensive than trying to get rid of our carbon emissions?
You have a point there. The aerosols created by human activities produce a negative effect because they increase the reflecting power of the Earth, the atmosphere, and they reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the surface. In fact, there are some people who suggested projects of what is called geoengineering, of dumping aerosols into the atmosphere, into the stratosphere, where they will stay for a long time, let's say years, and using that as a way of cooling the Earth. That will work, no question. However, it has bad side effects. It'll also destroy the ozone layer. Well, and it'll cost more money, and we don't need it. So aside from that, it's an interesting idea
Yeah, go ahead.
called geoengineering.
Fred, this is not a question, but it's another data point that I wanted to have.
It was on. He's on.
This is another data point that doesn't get taken out and looked at very often. There's a single underground coal fire in China which is estimated to produce as much CO2 annually as all of the automobiles and trucks in this country. Even if we were to shut down our transportation system, we would still have a significant amount of CO2 coming into the atmosphere. This is a single fire, roughly 500 square miles in area, and it's just one of several throughout the world. So even if by chance CO2 is responsible for anthropogenic global warming, the kinds of things that are being talked about to curb it probably will not be very effective. So the other thing is, I think people don't appreciate, is that roughly 5% of the CO2 that goes into the atmosphere comes from manufacturing cement. All of the buildings and roads that we consider essential to our lifestyle generate CO2 also. So the focus has been on fossil fuels, when in fact we need to look at a much bigger picture.
It's absolutely true that a fraction, a non-negligible fraction of the CO2 comes from cement manufacture. And that has to do with construction.
Yeah, go ahead. The student has a question.
Hi, I had one quick question. The IPCC report is authored and reviewed by many of the authors who wrote those peer-reviewed articles and those data observations that are used to be interpreted by the IPCC. When you guys put together the NIPCC, do you offer up your drafts to those same authors who wrote those articles for their interpretation?
When you wrote since most of the data that you use is published from all the scientists that were in the IPCC, did you offer your results for them to review before you publish? Is that the question?
We have published a very few peer-reviewed papers. We don't know who the reviewers are. The editor obviously knows. They passed the review and they were published. That's how it works. You don't submit your paper to reviewers yourself. You submit it to a journal, and then the editor decides how it should be reviewed.
No, I wasn't talking about the journal articles. I was talking about the overall NIPCC report.
Oh, she's talking about your report, the report that NIPCC produced. Did you submit it to those authors of the data that you use for their review?
No. No. We simply publish it.
Okay.
That's the way it works. When you publish a book, you publish it, and then of course people can comment. And they may like it or they may not like it. That's
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You had,
By the way, there are 200 references in here, so there are something like 500 authors, let's say. It would be impossible to submit it. And what would you do? They send you comments?
The IPCC report has...
It's not practical. It's just not, it is not done.
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, just a little point of clarification, so I understand this correctly. You had said that the lack of a hot spot in the DataSON data was proof that there is no warming in the atmosphere. Was that correct? Did I interpret that correctly? And also you said later on in the presentation that the satellite data is the only one you trust. So my question is, if by your own admission you don't trust the DataSON data, why are you using that as your central argument that warming is not occurring in the atmosphere based on data that by your own admission you don't really trust?
Some of your conclusions were based on the surface data.
Yeah, that
And
one
you
picture
said
you
that the
showed
da-
there that had the accumulated pictures, and there was the one that said that there was supposed to be a hot spot there based on the DataSON data, and you said that that was proof that there is no warming. But by your own admission, you're claiming that that data is not trustworthy, that it's only the satellite data, and I'm not just, yeah, that one right there.
The previous one.
All of this comes from this government report, which is produced by the best experts we have.
No, I think it was the previous slide.
Yeah, which is part of
This
that
one, this
report.
one?
Yeah, right there. So if you
That's
can,
from this government report.
right. So the next slide right there. Yeah, you're saying this slide right here was your proof that there was no warming in the atmosphere, but yet it's based on the RadioSON data, and by your own admission, you don't trust these data; that you only trust the satellite data. So I'm not disputing what you're saying.
No.
I'm just asking for clarification.
Oh, I see. Oh, well,
that if
I
you
can-
trust
I can
these
answer your
DataSON
question.
data or not.
No. The satellite data, unfortunately, do not have any vertical resolution. The satellite data are unable to measure temperature at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
They measure an integrated temperature. They have excellent horizontal resolution, but no vertical resolution. If you want vertical resolution, as you show here,